Yes, kings and queens, we are back with another episode, the 32nd episode to be exact, of the Dream Shakers podcast. I am your co-host, George Nunez, with my co-host.
Stefan Odom.
And today we have another special guest. She is a Bronx native. You know, we got to rep the X one time. She graduated from Columbia University with a Bachelor of Arts in Film Studies. She is a Forbes 30 Under 30 recipient and has had previous experiences as a teaching fellow at KIPP Foundation, a lab fellow at 4.0 schools, a national program director at Students for Education Reform, a student organizer at Democracy Prep Public Schools, a regional field director. Wow, she's just doing everything. At
Just listen to my
Rushmore for New York, an extern at Braven, and an entrepreneur in residence at BXL Business Incubator. And it doesn't stop there. She leveled up even better, right? Even more. She is the co-founder / CEO of the Knowledge House. So please give a warm welcome to Jerelyn Rodriguez.
And thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to speak to you both.
Thank you. Thank you. How are you feeling today? What's going on?
Feeling good. You know,
Okay.
I'm happy it's Thursday. I'm happy that it's summertime. We get warmer weather, even though sometimes it's too hot and then sometimes it's not hot enough. But, you know, summertime for us means that we're launching new programs this summer. And it means, especially in this time, that we are getting ready to open up our office, get to see some staff and students in person, and we get to plan, you know, the last 6 months of the year. So it's an exciting time for us.
Wow, that is amazing. And it's a beautiful thing to see that you're productive and things are going your way. But I gotta do something very quick, right? Before we even kick off this interview, this podcast episode, we have to take a moment to pay homage, right? We have to, and I've seen you guys do it before earlier as I was giving you an intro. We need to throw the X up one time for the Bronx. You know, we gotta do that one time.
Always.
We gotta do that one time. And speaking of the X, let's dive right in because we come from humble beginnings. We come from humble backgrounds. What was it like growing up in the Bronx as a first generation American, Afro-Latina, parents from DR, Dominican Republic? What was that upbringing like? Tell us.
So I'm the first in my family to be born in the US. So being born and raised in the Bronx, you know, I'm just so proud. And I identify, you know, as a Bronxite first, then New York City resident, you know. And so growing up, the Bronx being so diverse, I was always around a lot of immigrant families. All of my best friends, all of my peers growing up were all Black and brown for the most part. And it really wasn't until high school when I went to a school outside of the Bronx that I really got to understand how unique I was as someone coming from the Bronx. And so, yeah, I think that's really when I started getting a citywide and nationwide context. And then you hear the bad things about the Bronx, all the stigmas about the Bronx. Growing up, I loved the diversity, the creativity, and the richness, you know, from like Bronx people. And then I think starting high school, when I was exposed to other boroughs and people coming from other neighborhoods, then I was like, I have an opportunity as a leader to like rep the Bronx even more, go stronger for the Bronx, right? And especially as I become a social impact leader, make sure that I am improving the Bronx. And I made a commitment, I think, during college, like whatever I do afterwards, I'm always going to give back to the Bronx.
So, yeah, that was a great description, right? Or you painted a great picture of what it was like growing up in the Bronx, Jerelyn. But we felt like you didn't give us enough, right? Like what was it like being unique? You talked about how you were this unique person growing up, and I could relate to that. And I could also relate to being an Afro-Latino, right? Like you from the like I'm from Honduras, and so like yo puedo hablar español también, but like how was it like being an Afro-Latino Latina and growing up in that space, and also what was it like growing up in hybrids? I think you said before you're from that hybrids area, so what was it like growing up?
So I actually grew up right in between Mott Haven and Highbridge on the Grand Concourse. So I grew up really close to Yankee Stadium. Literally, you could hear the shouts from the folks at the stadium. Like that was how I grew up, loving the Yankees, loving hip hop, and understanding that where I'm from, those are where the pioneers of hip hop came from. And that's why I was very proud, to be a Bronx resident. Uh, and I think especially being a part of the immigrant community and being the first Dominican from my family to be born in the US meant that naturally I had to be a leader. You know what I mean? Like I spent my childhood with my mother hosting all of my aunts and uncles and cousins as they emigrated from the DR to the Bronx. You know what I mean? And as a Dominican in New York City, I had to go extra hard to rep the Bronx because, as y'all know, a lot of the Dominicans, or the majority of them in New York, are in Washington Heights. So I'm like really.
Or they indictment.
They're in Dykeman, right? They're in Dykeman, right? So I had to go extra hard to rep the Bronx, especially as a Dominican in New York City. But I think, the great thing about the Bronx is the immigrant population, right? Because you don't only have the Afro Latinos, but you have a lot of Mexicans, you have a lot of African immigrants. And so that experience in the Bronx is so different than the experience in Dykeman, for example. You know what I mean? So I feel like growing up in the Bronx, I get a little bit of everything. I get the Black community, the Latinx community, right? I get the Afro Latinos, I get the African immigrants. And you just see people from all walks of life.
Can't forget the Caribbeans, the Jamaicans and everything like that.
Absolutely. So just excited to grow up in a place that is so diverse, and also a place with a lot of opportunity, because I have had to convince other mindsets to see the Bronx for its assets versus its flaws. You know what I mean? And so that's the role that I've taken as a community leader. I don't want to hear about all of the bad things that happen in the Bronx and how we have the worst health rates, we have the worst crime rates. I want to hear about how creative Bronx people are, right? How we have pioneered things in the past. And so there's an opportunity to keep building on that, right? When it comes to the work that I do every day with the Knowledge House, that's exactly why I built it. And I decided with my co-founder, this needs to be headquartered in the South Bronx, because in the Bronx, where we've created salsa, hip hop, graffiti, there's no reason why young people, especially as digital natives, can't produce technology, right? These little kids, poor or rich, are in New York City using apps, right? Using social media, playing video games on an everyday basis. There's no reason why they can't be producing these technologies and these products. And I think that if we can get Bronx young people to build these innovations, then we bring back pioneering to the Bronx, right? And we see that Bronx has a lot of opportunity, has a lot of talent. And so I've made it my life's work.
So the story that I'm hearing thus far is one of empowerment, right? It's one of advancement, and it's one of rebirth, right? Like thinking yes. of a new future for the borough. Now I can see that arc, but when I delved into your background, I saw initially that the undergrad degree was in film studies, right?
Oh yeah.
And then you ultimately, made this pivot into a career in education. So first and foremost, how was that Ivy League experience, especially coming from the Bronx, right? And then what inspired that shift in focus?
That's such a good question because the reason I went into social impact and workforce development specifically is because with my own story and my own career pathway, I felt like even though I studied film and I had aspirations to work in film professionally, I didn't have the right mentors and I didn't have the right internships. And I just wasn't on the right career path to actually pursue film professionally. And I wanted to make sure that young people, the generation coming after me, didn't have the same issue, you know? And when I was actually ideating, problem solving for unemployment, for lack of education, and especially trying to figure out why folks from low-income communities weren't enrolling and persisting through college, that's when I started focusing on alternative pathways, right? And when we thought of the first MVP of the Knowledge House, me and my co-founder, we actually thought, okay, well, let's teach coding, right? Let's teach like engineering, like chemical engineering or electrical engineering, and then let's teach film. And it just so happened at that time, you could teach code for free, right? You can go on YouTube, you can connect people to free tutorials. And that's what we started out with in that pilot, and then that's what we stuck with because the labor market doesn't lie. Tech is one of those sectors that is still growing. And as we are recovering from COVID, it has proven to be fail proof, right? Those jobs are higher paying, they're not going anywhere. And so there's just too much opportunity within the tech sector to ignore the solution, just matching young people to tech skills. And so, with that, I really focused on equipping young people with mentors, education, and networks, employer partnerships that lead to family sustainable wages and jobs. I wish I had a knowledge house for film years ago when I was on my career path, right? So that's number one. But also, when I was making short films when I was younger, that's actually when I discovered my passion for technology. Starting in middle school, I was making short films and recording on standard DV tapes, these fat tapes you put in the camera. And when you take it out, it literally takes hours to digitize those tapes and move the footage from the camera onto a computer to edit. And then it was in high school, right? At the same time that YouTube was launched and these social media platforms were launched. That's when the industry switched to HD tapes, and it was really easy to record footage on a little chip that you enter in your computer, and then editing was like instant, right? And then I was like, wow, look how cinema has been transformed because of technology. And I especially was really compelled by the fact that social media and YouTube was going to make storytelling to the masses, accessible, because now we have technology. And then I thought, wow, technology hasn't only impacted my own passion and has changed the film sector, right? But there's so many economic opportunities within the tech sector. We need to make sure that all people have access to these opportunities. And then I made a little pivot.
Yeah, it's so funny when you talk about film, right? Because things just started to change when you look at tech, right? Like tech has something that has a large or significant or even pivotal role to play in this. You want to look at YouTube, right? Or you want to look at Netflix, all these streaming services where like people are like, hey, like why would I go to the movie theaters where I could literally just do Netflix and chill? And so things like that in how we start to see how tech plays a significant role in our society is just crazy. So that's just
Absolutely. And like you see that happening every single day, right? Like the Knowledge House is headquartered in the Bronx, but this year we are very lucky to be expanding nationally. And we're expanding to Atlanta, Newark, and Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is a city where there's a growth in tech jobs, and that's coming from this new emerging digital media sector, right? Where now you have streaming services that's hosting a whole bunch of films and of course TV shows, etc. But now there's a whole bunch of technologists that are needed to expand those services and make them equitable, inclusive, etc. And so that's one of the reasons why we chose LA as an expansion site, right? So I'm very excited because it just means for our students, more employment opportunities. For me personally, and probably selfishly, it means that there's more overlap with film and technology. So it's exciting for sure.
absolutely, and we can't wait to hear more about the journey. And we also wanted to talk a bit about certain things that you've mentioned, right? In terms of
Yeah.
education, network, you're in the ed tech space. You have had extensive sets of experiences at broader number of schools and educational organizations that are actively advocating for new approaches within the classroom. So what do you think is the biggest challenge facing public education today, especially for BIPOC students, right? Because
Yeah.
Steph and I uh,
Yeah.
went to public education schools all throughout our lives, right? Our upbringing or early education, early childhood. And we understood that once we did certain programs or we went off to college or we interned on Wall Street, there were certain gaps. And a lot of that had to do with the lack of education that we received growing up. And it's unfortunate, like we had to play catch up, but
Right.
it also gave us motivation to strive and still be great. So I want to hear, and I'm sure you definitely face those same challenges too, when you start to meet and interact with other people from around the world. So we wanted to hear your take on that.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're talking about is what we call the leaky pipeline. You know what I mean? We know that for young people to be prepared for strong jobs, it starts with education, right? If you get to college and you don't even have the skills to persist through college, then you can't leverage the networks, the learning that happens at college to then move on to that job, right? Um, when we started piloting the Knowledge House, we realized that 80% of our adult participants had stopped out of college, right? It means that there's a systemic issue, right? You have people coming from low income backgrounds wanting to pursue college. They know that education is important, but once they get there, they're not set up for success. So they're stopping out, whether it's for financial reasons or mental health reasons, right? Especially if they're like a first generation college student and they don't have enough support to persist and to overcome barriers. And that's what I spoke about, right? When I was studying film at Columbia, I didn't have enough social capital around me, like film mentors, folks that can connect me to internships so that I stood on that path. And so that's what the leaky pipeline looks like at the higher education end, right? Where colleges need to focus more on career readiness and employment outcomes, right? We still know that a lot of low income college students, especially, study psychology without a strong pathway into becoming a psychologist, right? So we need to educate folks early on before they get to college on what majors they should pursue, right? What out of school programs they should pursue to complement what they're learning in colleges, what internships and mentors they should be pursuing. That doesn't exist all the time, you know? And then ideally, all of that exploration should start in high school, if not earlier, right? So then we get to K-12. Um, and that's why in recent years, the Department of Education across the country, all of these DOE departments, especially in New York, they have focused on computer science for all, right? They want to train public school teachers to be able to teach computer science so that all students have access to computational thinking. And then you get high school students to study these AP courses, right? That lead to strong college enrollment and get folks early on to consider STEM careers. I think where we're at now is how much can the DOE scale this so that it isn't only the strongest and highest performing students that have access to these opportunities. It truly is all public school kids have access to STEM pathways specifically, right? Because that will ensure then that we have high school students graduating prepared and interested in pursuing STEM majors, right? Once you get to college, if colleges are partnering with employers in meaningful ways, then it means that low-income college students have access to more internships, right? It means that work-study jobs, for example, like when you are working and learning, your jobs are tied to your careers, right? When I was in college, I was swiping people into the lunchroom and swiping people into the dorm rooms. Imagine if I was on film sets and I was getting work study for that. I would be ahead of the game by the time graduation came. You know what I mean? It actually just so happened that because my mother is a retired teacher, my sister studied education, and that was the network that I had around me. I had a lot of education mentors. That's why I went into education right after college. So I think, like you all mentioned, beyond education, traditional education, there are out of school programs, there are networks that every person has to pursue to have strong pathways into employment. So it's about fixing the leaky pipeline, and it starts as early as possible, but you need to add this career exposure and these networks along the way.
So would you say then that the focus should be on, strengthening the abilities of students to gain meaningful employment? Is that where you think the emphasis
Yeah.
should be with education?
Yeah, because the way my brain works and the way that I have constructed the knowledge house, like we always focus on the end goal and then you backwards engineer from there, right? It means that if everyone is serious about eliminating poverty or reducing poverty, right? Then we are focusing on wages and high paying careers. And we are educating young people about pathways into those careers, whether they include college or not. You know, everyone traditionally tells poor kids, you must go to college to be successful. When in reality, there are so many high paying jobs that do not require college. They require a certification or training, right? On the job training. You think about MTA workers, those who conduct trains or those who engineer the platforms. A lot of those folks have work experience, they have certifications, they don't have a college degree, they're making close to six figures. I don't think it's fair to tell poor kids only college when there are so many occupations to pursue that lead to those family sustaining jobs and employment and wages, especially when we are seeing so many low-income folks pursue college, but then don't persist. It's a systemic issue. Colleges are not setting this population up for success. There must be other options, you know? So I think, yes, if we start with employment outcomes, wages, right? Then we can backwards engineer to expose young people to college and non-college pathways that lead to those careers. And so that means that for high school, if not earlier in middle school, we are exposing youth to these career pathways. We're encouraging girls to study STEM. We are talking about the fact that tech jobs right now mean design roles, sales roles, account management, right? It's not only coding and it's not only math. Everyone has a place in tech, right? Um, and it means being very honest with adults about their options. If college is still the best pathway to a high paying job, then that should be plan A for everyone. But if that doesn't work, what is plan B? Here are certification programs, here are boot camps, and here are the scholarships to those boot camps. And then once you are done with job training or college, here's an internship, here's an apprenticeship, here's a mentor, and here's how you work your way up the career ladder. It literally has to be that holistic.
So who do you think in turn should be held responsible or accountable? Is it government, the politicians, the schools, the wealthy, the wealthy individuals? And we all three of us on this call, the reason why we've had some similar successes because we had mentors to help us kind of make it out of our situations or make it out of the Bronx, and then eventually pay it forward to the Bronx. So how can we ensure that these other kids get these opportunities? Because the fact of the matter is, a lot of people don't have mentors or don't know what mentorship really is, or can reap the benefits, which is why they're currently in their situations.
Yeah, well, I think you're talking about achieving systems change. And so here's the bad part about answering this question. It's not one person who is responsible, right? Multiple stakeholders need to work together. And that's just how infrastructure works, how it's set up. And that's where we start, right? With the current infrastructure we are operating within, obviously people can say that it's broken in many ways, but then you step back and you ask yourself, who are the people who are empowered to create this infrastructure and maintain it? Because when you start there, these are the people or the agencies, right, that are preventing or allowing access into this infrastructure or improving it, right? So just starting with government, if the government invests more funding in education, then public schools, teachers can do more, right? If we invest more in social services, then teachers, principals, and schools just have more help, right? To like reduce poverty, for example. So those are partnerships that have to happen at the community level, right? Between government and communities, right? But when we focus on the other end of this leaky pipeline, which is employment, right? You have to bring in the private sector, right? Because very often the government is influenced by money, and who's got the money, right? So you have to go to those corporations, and we have to find ways to incentivize employers, for example, to hire from underserved populations, right? The same way that they have worked with the government to outsource tech jobs across, outside of the US, right? Like, why can't we create incentives for the private sector to hire locally, hire people of color, hire more women? So there needs to be more collaboration between local communities, government, and the private sector. Philanthropy is also a huge part of this, right? Because when it comes to the nonprofit sector, especially, we can't do much without sustainable investment, right? And so literally, when we think about the nonprofit sector, government, and the private sector, we are overcoming the huge issue about lack of diversity, right? Lack of representation, because the leaders of all of these bodies that I just mentioned have traditionally been white men, right? And now we're starting to change that, right? In government, we have a lot of progressives, or there's a progressive movement to get a lot of Black and Brown people from local grassroots communities to actually be politicians, right? after the murder of George Floyd, now you have corporations stepping up and finally saying, yes, we need to diversify our workforce and we need to hire locally. We need government to be a little faster, right? And to be as responsive as these other bodies. But that's the hope. And so it really requires coordination and partnership. And in this capitalist society where everyone feels like they're competing with each other, it can be hard. But what I find is that the more people of color we empower into these leadership roles, the more that gets fixed. Because I have just seen, solutions that are made for the community by the community seem to be more effective. Those solutions usually rely on more collaboration. And we're just more successful when we work together. And so that's my hope.
One aspect that you spoke about at length through our discussion thus far has been empowerment, right? Ensuring that the individuals that come through this pipeline have the means to advance within society. And that seems to strike a very high, large ethical goal, right? Like there's this sense of purpose within the organization. Understanding the fact that technology has been involved in a number of events that have made the foundation upon which our society rests a bit rocky. Has there been any thought about the ethical teachings for students within your program such that they don't introduce outcomes that would be detrimental for future future generations?
This is something that we think about at the Knowledge House because, beyond strong tech skills, people need to build confidence and they need to build essential skills, non-tech skills like collaboration, interpersonal skills, problem solving. And often, especially in the tech industry, which, that lacks people of color in leadership, especially, you get entry-level technologists who are Black and brown, and they're experiencing imposter syndrome. So it is really key.
Wait. We're having a dream shaker moment right now. Can you explain what the imposter syndrome is? Because a lot of us go through that. I went through that in corporate. Can you dive into that?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area where we really focus in at the Knowledge House, and we teach our students, right? You might have concerns about not fitting into an environment where you are the only one or you are the minority, and you have to fight with the mindset of thinking, I don't belong here, or I do not deserve a spot here. Sometimes this comes from maybe the company where I'm working at wanted to, fill a quota. And so I'm like a checklist hire versus I actually have the skills and experience to thrive here and be a part of this culture and contribute to that culture, right? And so often we have to equip our students with the confidence to not go into their first jobs doubting themselves. Often the private sector is talking about culture fits. We teach our students to position themselves as culture contributors because they will be different. But that's a good thing. You know what I mean? The fact that we are coming from low-income communities where we've had to learn how to be scrappy, that's a skill, that's an asset. That makes you different, that might make you more creative when it comes to problem solving, right? It might make you grittier when it comes to being resilient and getting something done. Or it might allow you to have like initiative to get ahead of a problem, or research the solution before you ask for help. And so we have to teach our students, when you are convincing an employer to hire you, when you are pitching yourself, focus on the things that make you different, right? And focus on what value you will add to a company that is mostly white males, for example. And so going back to your question, right? This is why we have to teach these topics and have these discussions. Aside from imposter syndrome, we also have discussions about polytalk, right? Like literally, how can you be at your first job as a technologist talking about politics, right? Especially last year when we were going through the presidential election, like our students were talking about it outside of class. So why not make room in class to discuss differences, right? Teach them empathy, right? If you can understand how someone from an opposing party thinks and why they think that, then you have the skills to be more persuasive when you are pitching your own viewpoints, right? When you are advocating for your community. Um, and so these are the things that we teach in addition to those hard tech skills, because at the end of the day, being a leader, right, and impacting communities means that you have essential skills and you have like a holistic viewpoint on things. So it's that leadership development that's important in addition to the tech skills. And we teach that strategically.
Wow. And even like backtracking a bit, how was your experience as an EIR, entrepreneur in residence at BXL Business Incubator? And how did that positively impact the knowledge house when you were uh, in that experience, right? Like what sparked that knowledge house to kind of excel and push forward?
Yeah, so the Knowledge House was so grateful to be partnering with the BXL Business Incubator in its first founding years, you know. Right now, we're located in Mott Haven in the South Bronx, but originally our home was in Hunts Point, you know, and Hunts Point together uh, are the neighborhoods that are the most impoverished in the Bronx. You know what I mean? So it was really important for us to have a presence in the neediest neighborhoods. But the Hunts Point area, I would say, you know, like they have higher crime rates because of of its proximity to Rikers Island. It's a food desert, and so just being able to test our solution in Hunts Point was so meaningful. You know what I mean? You know, our vision statement is if we can prove this model in the Bronx, we can take it anywhere. And for our first 3 years, it was like, if we can do this in Hunts Point, we can do it anywhere in New York City, you know? And so the BXL Business Incubator was our first home. So that was actually the first city-funded co-working space in New York City. And when I was there were so many tech entrepreneurs, and these entrepreneurs were the ones to introduce me to the growing tech sector in the Bronx. So my co-founder, he was actually the community manager at the incubator when it first started. He was the one to introduce me to the Bronx Tech Meetup, to leaders like Ventura Carter. And he finally introduced me to all of these tech entrepreneurs at the co-working space. And I was really inspired by them because, you know, they were tech companies making money, but choosing to stay in the Bronx, you know? And furthermore, they wanted to give back to the community and they wanted to empower youth. And so that environment there, the ecosystem that was fueled by the co-working space really is what helped launch the Knowledge House. And so we held our first classes at BXL. The BXL entrepreneurs were the first to hire our graduates. And then, you know, they were able to accommodate us until we grew to a level that we had our own office, that we needed our own office. And that's where we are now. But, you know, BXL is operated by a nonprofit called the Business Outreach Center Network. And that nonprofit has been so supportive of the Knowledge House. You know, like our first few years, they gave us laptops for students. Obviously, they gave us free space at the co-working space, but they also provide business services, you know? So the leader at Business Outreach Center was the one to teach me accounting, right? Was the one to teach me about board development. And she herself became a board member at the Knowledge House. So we are so grateful to BXL. We're excited that, you know, my co-founder still lives close to BXL. So we are close to the people there, and they still engage with us to support our students. So yeah, very grateful to them. And now they are really focusing on supporting women entrepreneurs. So that's exciting. We actually have a contract with them to provide digital literacy workshops to entrepreneurs impacted by COVID. A lot of these entrepreneurs are now located at the BXL Business Incubator. So it's a continuous partnership.
The Bronx, again, has come up as a theme throughout this entire experience. And one thing that really stuck with me there is that this environment, we know it can be intense, right? And we know that the individuals that come from this space and that are able to thrive ultimately end on to do, or ultimately go on to do some pretty phenomenal things, right? So leveraging that in a business context and saying, hey, well, if this business model will work here, it's going to literally work anywhere, makes all the sense in the world. A question that I had for you, though, is that technology is unique, right? Technology is a field that has repeatedly been labeled as dynamic, right? You can't get it in a steady state. And because of this, the demands within the field constantly change, right? So how does the Knowledge House intend to keep up with the changes in this space and ensure that the content provided to students in a given track is aligned with employer needs?
Yeah, so that's such a great question because I don't think it's responsible or effective to deliver workforce programs that are not aligned to the industry, right? So that's really important. And so what we do at the Knowledge House is we form meaningful partnerships with companies so that our students always have access to industry trends, emerging technologies, and people that work in the sector. So we work with companies to mobilize volunteers and match them to our students. And, you know, with the students, they do tutoring, interview prep, they host career talks, we do some job shadowing. And we also have a tech advisory board. And, you know, these are all council folks who counsel us on updating our curricula, making sure that it's aligned to industry needs, equipping us with HR assessments, for example, that assess technical abilities. And so everything we do always is closely tied to companies, businesses, large and small. It means that we are updating our curriculum every year. It means that we are matching our job trainees to mentors who work in the industry. And, you know, that's why we're always looking at the market. Like we know, for example, that as folks return to work, there's still a demand for remote work. People are still hiring remote technologists. But as companies stay hybrid or virtual, there's been an increase in like cloud jobs, right? People or companies are making sure that their data doesn't live on devices or servers, but they live in the cloud. And so now there's increased demand for those roles. So being able to be responsive is important. So we partner with industry professionals to do that through volunteer or board service. We work with employers to backwards engineer our program, make sure that we are actually meeting hiring needs and just paying attention to the market, you know, beyond emerging technologies and tech skills, the way people hire is changing, right? People are being more serious about diversity and inclusion. So that also impacts our work too.
All right, perfect, Jerelyn. So we greatly appreciate you. We wanted to ask you this final question. Here at Dream Shakerz, we're all about paying it forward. So what are the 3 pieces of advice you would give to your younger self?
Okay, let's see. I would say, I know everyone always says, you know, keep going, do not give up. But for me, it didn't really register until I became an adult to appreciate failing forward. You know what I mean? Entrepreneurship is literally about not giving up. If you do not give up, it is inevitable that you will make traction, progress, and you will succeed. And so just understanding that, feeling forward, that would be number one. Number two, I would say sustainability comes with partnerships, you know. Obviously it comes with money because money, you know, can sustain things. But in the absence of money, it is people, you know, it's reaching out and getting help from people, getting mentors, learning best practices. Literally everything is best practices and copying what has worked before. So you have to always learn. You never know the right answer. So working with other people to listen to their perspective, to get some help, and just to keep things in motion is so important. And third, you know, this is something that I'm still trying to grasp and improve as a leader. Like being a leader literally means that you are making room for others, you know. Externally, I'm the face of the knowledge house, but the knowledge house does not become sustainable until other people can equally advocate for the organization, can equally find resources for the organization. And someone else, once, you know, I am ready to leave the knowledge house, has to keep the brand going, right? And so leadership is always about empowering others. Leadership is about supporting other people. Leadership is not about you and like what you can do alone. It is what you can do more of because you have other help. And so those are the three things that I would tell myself if I were younger.
Jerelyn, we greatly appreciate you. That wraps and concludes the episode, the 32nd episode of Dream Shakerz. We hope to hear from you in the near future. We definitely want to invite you back for future episodes. But we appreciate you, Queen, and we hope that you continue to pay it forward because you are a dream shaker for sure.
Well, thank you so much for the time and the conversation, George and Stefan, and I look forward to coming back.